I call this July 14th Planning Commission meeting to order. Thank you for joining us on a hot July evening. We have two items to consider tonight. The Castle View Homes 4050 Kimball Bridge Road is on hold. So if you're here for that, we're not going to consider that here tonight. So the first item will be consideration of the minutes from the last week's meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes from last time's meeting.
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries. First item is CU-22-05 off leash 142 South Main Street. Michael?
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. The first item before you this evening is a conditional use to allow recreation facilities indoor and outdoor for off-leash on approximately 2.3 acres in the downtown overlay. Off-leash is a concept which includes a one-story, 5,400 square foot restaurant, a 3,000 square foot covered dog area, and approximately 3/4 of an acre outdoor dog park. I have the location map on the overhead. This is the former Rite Aid site located at 142 South Main Street, and the property, the undeveloped property right behind it, 125 Norcross Street. Of course, that's at the northeast corner of Old Milton Parkway and South Main Street. As I mentioned, this is the former Rite Aid. It's properties developed with an 11,500 square foot pharmacy. It's been vacant for a few years. Property is zoned C2 General Commercial. C2 allows restaurant by right and requires approval of a conditional use to allow recreation facilities indoor and outdoor. Surrounding properties are also zoned C2. The Taco Bell and Salt Factory are located to the north. Publix, Chase Bank, and a gas station are located to the east. Park Plaza Office Building and Mammoth Car Wash are located to the south. And the shopping center with the crust is located to the west. According to the applicant, Off Leash is a state-of-the-art dog park facility and restaurant featuring outdoor and indoor spaces for patrons and their dogs. Dog Park will operate on a membership model with guest and day passes available. Hours of operation proposed are Sunday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Friday and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. The applicant anticipates about 8 to 12 employees at this location. Have some more exhibits, aerial view of the location. Of course, this is the former Rite Aid with the undeveloped property behind it. That backs up to Norcross Street, which is the street that separates this property from the Publix parking lot. It's a view from Old Milton Parkway of the location. It's a view closer to the corner with South Main Street. This is a view at the corner looking down north up South Main Street. You'll notice in this location here, there's an old focal point feature that was developed at the corner here with Alpharetta on this structure. We have a condition that would redesign this corner as well. I'll call that out when we get to it. So this is the applicant's site plan. The initial application that was submitted to the city was going to try to reuse the former Rite Aid structure. The applicant updated the application and made a decision to go ahead and redevelop the site completely. So tear down the existing Rite Aid building and build new. And the site plan is showing the restaurant in this location, so the building has been pulled to the corner. Previously, the parking surrounded the site with the large former Rite Aid building in the center. So this building has been pulled up to the corner, which we like. It promotes a walkable environment. The covered dog area is located here. The parking has been placed behind the restaurant and covered dog area in this location. And then you have the outdoor dog park in this location here. They have added on-street parking to Norcross Street as well. Total of 32 parking spaces, 27 in the surface parking lot and 5 on street, total of 32. UDC requires 22. Note on the site plan that I found interesting was that the redevelopment of the site would actually result in a loss of almost 15,000 square feet of impervious area. So there'll be 15,000 about 15,000 square feet less of impervious area, more green area on the site. The other thing that I noted, the applicant provided, well, before I get to their landscape plan, this is their tree save plan, so tree protection plan. It's grouping of trees in this location here adjacent to the gas station. There's also a existing wall detention pond down in this pocket right here. There's also tree saves within the dog park, and then there are also tree saves. So any of these that have the large circle around them, that's the critical root zone of the tree. That means the tree would be saved. This is the applicant's landscape plan. So these are going to address their required landscape strips as well as landscaping within the parking lot. Landscape strips are typically going to be aesthetic material, so material that is addressing aesthetics, not screening. Screening landscape materials typically referred to as a landscape buffer. So along the streets, these are required landscape strips. And because the applicant does have some outdoor areas where there could be outdoor dining furniture as well as play equipment for the dogs, the applicant had made a decision to include both deciduous and evergreen landscape material in the landscape strip. And that will help screen some of the outdoor activities from the road. Just going back to that tree protection plan, there was a total of 52 trees that were being preserved on that site. I thought that was a pretty impressive number, so I just wanted to mention that. With regard to the stormwater pond, I did mention that there's an existing pond here. The applicant has indicated that they would make any needed modifications to that pond to address their stormwater needs. Have a few elevations, proposed elevations of the building. Did send these to the city's downtown consultant for review. Did have quite a few comments. He did believe that the applicant could make some modifications to the renderings to design this building in the shingle or stick architectural style. Those both are approved styles in the downtown. And that could be done by addressing some of the comments that have been provided. The renderings do show the building as a one-story building. This is the restaurant building that I'm speaking of. Includes a combination of brick and lap siding with metal roof. We did note that this is a predominant corner in the city. This is one of the highest traffic intersections that we have in the downtown and in the city. We looked at the other corners and the buildings at the other corners. There is a predominant use of brick on those buildings. So we do have a condition that we had recommended with respect to the exterior material of the building on this property. We also did note that at these corners of this intersection, there are existing focal point features. So at the southeast corner, at the Alpharetta Convention and Visitor Bureau, you have a water feature. The Walgreens, you have the clock tower at that corner, and then of course this corner has an existing focal point feature that I pointed out on the photograph. We believe any kind of redevelopment at the site should include a sculpture or a focal point feature that would complement that corner. Looking at traffic, the use would generate 6 a.m. peak hour trips and 78 p.m. peak hour trips. Of course, we did review this request against the established criteria for conditional use. We do not believe that the proposal would have significant impacts on surrounding properties. Those surrounding properties are developed with non-residential uses, so you're in a commercial environment. We do think that this use is not represented currently in the downtown. We do see quite a few people out on the street, out on the sidewalks, walking with their dogs. We do think that this is a use that would be beneficial to be added in the downtown. The applicant indicated on their citizen participation plan that they did not receive any public comments, and this item was shown to the public on the May 11th Community Zoning Information Meeting. We did have a few public comments. There were questions about whether or not the business would have an alcohol license. There were some concerns about safety for dogs. And then there were also some concerns regarding this location for a dog park, considering that the Fetch Dog Park has just recently opened on Maxwell Road, about a mile south of this location. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the applicant's request subject to 16 conditions, and I'll go through those briefly. Condition 1, recreation facilities indoor and outdoor shall be added as a conditional use at 142 South Main Street and 125 Norcross Street and limited to no more than 3,000 square foot covered dog area and a 0.3 acre outdoor dog area. 2, conditional use approval shall be limited to off-leash. No additional recreation facilities, indoor and outdoor use, or subleasing shall be permitted on the subject property. Condition 3, recreation facilities, indoor and outdoor, shall be limited to an indoor and outdoor dog park with restaurant. Condition 4 are the hours of operation. Condition 5 is the site plan specific condition, tying it to the Gaskins and LaCroix site plan dated 6/14/22. Condition 6, building architecture and materials shall be developed in compliance with the Alpharetta Downtown Code and Downtown Consultant, subject to final approval by DRB. Building shall be 75% brick as determined by DRB. Condition 7, outdoor furniture, dining area, and dog park and play equipment with primary or bright colors shall be screened from the public right-of-way and shall require final approval by DRB. So if they do not use bright or primary colors on that furniture, they wouldn't need to screen it from the right-of-way. Condition 8 addresses the corner of South Main Street and Old Milton Parkway, requiring a minimum 2,500 square foot open space with decorative landscaping, hardscape, and focal point features / sculpture representative of the city's historic downtown, with final approval of the focal point feature sculpture by the Cultural Arts Commission. Property owners shall be responsible to maintain the corner open space and all improvements. Condition 9, required landscape strip material shall be planted in front of any proposed fencing. Let me just show you. So they've got this fencing, and that fencing is along the Old Milton Parkway. Just wanted to make sure that the landscaping in the landscape strip is planted in front of the fence, so between the fence and the sidewalk and road. Help screen the fence, soften the look of the fence. Condition 10, developer shall improve Old Milton Parkway streetscape for minimum 4-foot planter planted with street trees. Of course, subject to approval by GDOT right away. Minimum 8-foot sidewalk and decorative pedestrian lighting. Condition 11, developer shall improve Norcross Street streetscape with a minimum 4-foot planter planted with street trees. Minimum 5-foot sidewalk and decorative pedestrian lighting. 12, project entrance on South Main Street shall be landscaped with ornamental plantings as approved by DRB. 13 is the tree save condition, tying it to the tree protection plan by Gaskins and LaCroix dated 6/24/22. That is the plan that I showed you earlier. Condition 14, dumpster enclosure shall consist of materials similar to those used on the building, and gate shall be metal and opaque as approved by DRB. 15, building shall connect to the public sidewalk system. And 16, Old Milton Parkway curb cut shall be removed prior to the issuance of a CO. And that concludes the presentation. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Michael, for your presentation. Do you have any questions from the board? Yes.
Michael, thank you for the presentation. The picture that you have up on the slide on the screen right now, can you speak to how members of this park access? I think they had two different areas: a small dog park and a large dog park. Is the access, can they access it from the sidewalks as well as from coming through the restaurant, or is it strictly coming through the restaurant?
I think that's probably a better question to be answered by the applicant. I'm not sure. I think we'd be guessing. I know that from speaking to the applicant that they take the safety of the dogs very seriously here and have discussed protections to make sure they don't get out of this area. But I don't know for sure all the points of access around here, if you have to go through the restaurant or if you have to go through the covered pet area.
Okay, I'll ask the applicant when they come forward. One other question regarding, you mentioned in your presentation that the South Main Old Milton intersection is one of our highly trafficked areas. And I know that in the CZIM there was concerns from folks that were participating in regards to safety of the dogs and so forth. Do we have any data that you can share with us in regards to traffic activity at this particular site and how it compares to other intersections?
So, did ask Eric to provide some information on some traffic counts. Eric, I have this email here. I don't know if this is something that you would like to present that information.
The city does do traffic counts on different corridors from time to time. Back in 2021, we did a really good job at trying to cover many areas throughout the city. At that time, Main Street had about 22,000 vehicles per day on it. In comparison, in comparison, North Point Parkway had close to 12,000 vehicle trips a day on that whole corridor. To give everybody some context, a 4-lane facility can accommodate close to 32,000 trips a day, with two-way traffic. So we're not nearing max capacity for the 4-lane facility of Old Milton Parkway, and the 6-lane facility the 6-lane facility for Old Milton Parkway, or the 4-lane facility for Main Street Highway 9. Did you have any other specific questions?
No, that gives it some context to me because as a frequent pedestrian and also driver through that intersection, it appears and feels to me that it's a very dense, very, very busy, especially for pedestrians trying to cross there. It's a very busy intersection, and I just wanted to have a point of comparison. And I know, Michael, can you just point out on the map for those that are trying to understand the area that we're looking at right now?
Yeah.
It's not
Where
where the intersection is. Okay, right there. Okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Oh, that's really helpful. Great.
I have a couple questions kind of on the same line as Karen's. So that intersection, I think it has around, Eric, 12 lanes on all intersections. I mean, it is a very highly traveled, very dense, probably one of the most traveled.
The intersection
city,
itself
right?
is not very comfortable for pedestrians, correct?
Correct. Okay, and off-leash anticipates many of their members and guests will be pedestrians. So not only are they going to have to cross that pedestrian crosswalk, but there are other crosswalks they'll have to in order to get there, there are many other intersections in order to get there with the dogs, correct?
There's several different methods of getting to that location. You know, frequent many of the crosswalks in the area, you know, including the new Hawk signal right there near Public's entrance off of Main Street, and the Hawk signal by Smoke Jack. Those are a lot more comfortable to cross Main Street on than it is at the intersection at Old Milton Parkway. You know, getting over to Walgreens, it's doable. The traffic signals are timed to accommodate the pedestrian, you know, walking speed, and you know, it does allow you to get there. It's just not a whole lot of fun being out there in the middle of the
Exactly. Okay.
6 lanes.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions on this side? Michael, I noticed that there are some proposed amendments or changes to the conditions. I assume that staff has looked at it. Which ones do you agree with? Can you guide us through the changes? For example, they're requesting 3,600 square feet of covered dog area. Is staff okay with that?
Yes, I did discuss the 3 changes that the applicant is requesting to the conditions. They're requesting a change to condition 1, 6, and 8. I am okay with the change to condition 1. The applicant had indicated to me that they just wanted to increase the size of that covered dog area just to give a little bit of flexibility. It's an increase of about 600 square feet. I didn't find any issue with that. Condition 8, they're also asking for a change to condition 8. That is the condition dealing with the corner of Old Milton Parkway and South Main Street with the focal point feature. We have occasionally had applicants that are looking for more clarity on that to put a dollar amount in there, and we have had a few public hearing applications where Planning Commission or council has been agreeable to put the dollar figure in there. And the dollar figure that is proposed at this location is similar to other dollar figures that we've had for focal point features. I know a development at the corner of Mayfield and Canton Street. The Hudson Park development had one that had a cost cap that was similar to this.
That's the 15,000.
With regard to, and that was condition 8. With regard to condition 6, our preference would be that we leave condition 6 as proposed by staff. We would feel more comfortable with making changes to that condition after we've seen some revisions to the renderings.
And there is a determination by the DRB.
Yes.
Okay.
Michael, I did have one. How did you come up with the 7, or how was it arrived at the 75% brick? Is that a fairly standard item in the area?
So we've more recently used the 75%. We occasionally will say primarily or predominantly brick on the exterior of the building, and I believe it was Planning Commission maybe it made a change in the past just to make sure that we clarify what primarily meant. But the reason why we had that condition in there is we looked at the other corners at that predominant intersection in the city and in the buildings, the focal point features that have been done at those corners, as well as the buildings at that corner. And the other buildings at those corners, the Walgreens, the Park Plaza office building where the Alpharetta Convention Center and Visitor Bureau is located, those are brick buildings. And so had this rendering had very few comments from the downtown consultant, the condition probably would have been worded a little bit differently, saying that the building should be developed substantially similar to the elevations. But because there were some comments and some tweaks that needed to be made to these elevations based on the downtown consultant's comments, That's why we went ahead and added that sentence in there with regard to the brick.
Thank you. All right, no further questions. Oh, you have
Sorry,
one more?
one quick one. The height of the fence along Old Milton Parkway,
Yes.
is that just a city code? Is it 6 feet?
Actually, that's a good point that you bring up. So the appearance of what they're showing here has the appearance of a 4-foot to 5-foot fence. However, on a commercial property, the code does allow up to an 8-foot fence. And I don't think that that would be appropriate in this location. So it may be a good idea to add a new condition or add to the conditions to limit the height of that fence.
And your recommendation would be?
I would say no more than 5. 4 is probably going to be what you would typically see here, but there may be a need for 5 just based on the height that a dog can jump. There may be a reason. Might be something that we would want to ask the applicant about.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, we're going to ask the applicant to come forward and make a presentation.
And Eric, could you bring up our PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. While he's doing that, let me go ahead and just introduce myself. My name is Jeff Haymore. I'm with the law firm of Dillard Sellers. Our address is 1776 Peachtree Street in Atlanta. Our firm, of course, represents the applicant off-leash. Unfortunately, my law partner, Julie Sellers, who filed the application on behalf of off-leash, has a scheduling conflict. Here tonight with me is Wendy Newman and Meg Major, and both of them are with off-leash, and they'll have an opportunity to speak with you in just a second. Also, Jason Diaz with Vickers Design, who's the site planning and design firm. As you heard, our development proposes approximately 5,400 square feet of restaurant use, which is a permitted use in the C2 zoning. The conditional use permit that we seek is so that we can have the dog areas, obviously both a covered area as well as an uncovered area. Both are considered in the code a recreational facility that requires that use permit. For some of you, especially if you're dog owners, you're very familiar with this type of use. I am not a dog owner, and so I was not that familiar. And so as I've learned a little bit about this, I thought I'd share with you kind of my perspective that may be of benefit to the public. I think of the proposed use similar to a playground where parents might take their kids to the park and we all come together. I know my wife and our kids, we would go to the park, bring our family and our friends' families, and we just kind of hang out and socialize. Adults usually kind of sit there and chat and catch up, and the kids are off at the playground. You know, obviously the difference here is we're talking about adults bringing their dogs, not just their children. But I thought that was helpful to me to kind of understand that this is something that's in demand, something that is prevalent in many parts of the metropolitan area and, of course, around the country. So just wanted to point that out to kind of give the context here. It's not a place where you go and drop off your dog and come back, right? You're there with your dog the entire time. It's very safe, and Wendy and Meg will go into that. So with that, I'd like to sort of turn the time over to them to kind of describe who they are, the concept, answer those kind of questions that you have, and then I'll come back and go through some of these slides. So I'm going to turn the time over first to Wendy.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Wendy Newman. I am the CEO of Cooper Holdings. I have worked, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lonnie Cooper, and being a native of Atlanta, as well as myself and Meg. I've worked with Lonnie for 20 years. I started as the assistant controller and am now the CEO and am running 3 of his businesses. This is our 4th concept that we have come up with. We run a marketing agency, a digital agency, and a talent representation agency. So probably most known for representing people like John Smoltz and Ernie Johnson and kind of some of those phenomenal talents that are locally based here in Atlanta and then also obviously across the country. And we create amazing experiences for a lot of corporate clients here in Atlanta. So AT&T, Cricket Wireless, we've done a lot of work with Aflac over the years. So we have kind of grounded ourselves in creating amazing experiences for lots of our other clients. And Lonnie and I, during the height of COVID, got together and said, how do we do this for ourselves? How do we create amazing experiences for something that I happen to be very passionate about? I have 3 children and 4 dogs. So our kids are now starting to age out. I've got 2 in college and 1 that's in high school, and our dogs have now become our next set of children that are with us. And so we have always kind of found ourselves creating these moments where we are connecting fans with brands. That's been how we've, gone about doing these other 3 businesses. And I think that what we've realized is, and especially during COVID, there were so many people who were adopting dogs and really finding that as they're working more remote and working from home, that they are connecting more with their pets and with their dogs. And we just don't have enough places here in Atlanta for them to be able to do that outside of their 4 walls. There are a lot of multifamily use homes around here. There's a lot of condos, townhouses, really beautiful homes that may not have large backyards. We want to create that for them. So this is more to be a place for them to have almost like their own backyard to come to. And typically, what you find in some of the other dog parks, we've done a lot of research across the country. There's obviously, a group here that's doing it well, and we would like to be a part of that. There's definitely room for all of us in this space. There are a lot of dogs to be had and a lot of people who love spending time with their dogs. I know from coming to Alpharetta, over the years, like I said, I'm a native. I actually used to work right down the street. Just seeing how much this place has changed and what an incredible job everyone has done to get this to a place where it really feels like it's very walkable. I live in the city. I'm actually in Decatur, so I walk a lot to a lot of the places that we have around our area. And I'm finding that this is, you guys have created that in Alpharetta, and it's pretty incredible. And to be able to then add something that it doesn't necessarily have right here in this downtown area was really why we chose this location. We've been doing our due diligence for the last couple of years. This is not just something that we came up with yesterday and said, hey, this is what we want to do. We literally have been at this for a couple of years to really come up with the right concept, the right business model to be successful, to be a fabric of the community. We really want to embed ourselves with the community. And if that is, partnering with a dog bakery down the street and selling dog treats at our location, if there's somebody here that makes, bandanas or leashes or collars, we want to be a part of that. We want for them to be able to feel like they have a place to also, maybe it's a Saturday afternoon where they're able to come and set up and sell their, the things that their merchandise that they're making for their dogs. So that's a part of what we want to do, is become a fabric of the community. No matter where we are, our plan obviously is to continue to grow. What we think is incredible about this is this will be our flagship. This is our prototype. This is where we're going to kick this whole thing off. And we chose Alpharetta. We went to a lot of different places Meg and I have done. I can't even tell you how many site visits. And this was the one that we really wanted, to start this amazing business in. So just a little bit more kind of about, who we are. Hopefully that helps to give some context to who we are as a business. Lonnie is 100% behind this. This is something that he believes in and is excited about. And I know that, Meg is going to give you a little bit more about the actual dog park and how we expect for this to work, to answer some of your questions about safety. that is definitely a concern that we have, and we have vetted a lot of those different ways to make sure that everything and everybody will continue to be safe. We do want it to be walkable, but we also expect to be a destination as well. We expect to bring people in on a Saturday that may not necessarily come to Alpharetta for something, but if they have a dog and we're able to explain to them that there's this great place, not only with us, but then you can walk up the street and have an amazing, dinner. You can listen to, to music or, movies on the lawn. We want to create a lot of that. We want to do, some dog yoga in the mornings for some of the, either work from home or stay at home moms and dads that want to come and bring their dogs and their children and do yoga in the park. We want to be able to create that. So the goal is to continue to keep, what you guys have built, which is we really want to add to the green space. We want to make sure that back parcel of that Rite Aid has yet to be developed. It's been sitting empty and luckily it's got some beautiful trees on it that we want to be able to take advantage of. So we really want to add to it. We want to make sure that we become a part of what you guys have already built. We know that we're kind of that very first point as you come into Main Street, that we will then make sure that we are adhering to everything and making sure that we fit in with what you guys have already done. So that's our goal. I'm going to let Meg come up and talk a little bit about actually how the park is going to operate on a day-to-day basis, give you a little more context on that.
Hello, nice to see you all. Thank you for having us here. So I'm going to answer more of the tactical questions. I was brought in almost a year ago to birth the off-leash baby. So I feel like it is my little child that we're trying to bring out to the world. So I know that there were some specific questions about where people would enter, and then I would love to answer any other questions you guys have just sort of tactically about how things might operate. So I don't know how to use this projector. Can you turn the projector on, or can I do it? Just put it on here? Perfect. Thought that might be easier than, perfect. So I kind of circled for everybody where the in and out of everything will come. So you will enter and you'll exit the dog park from this space over in this area. So we did that very purposefully. Obviously, safety is our #1 concern as well. So making sure that where you enter and exit would be away from any main roads. Another, and I'm not sure how many, of you have actually visited a dog park, but there's very specific fencing that we would obviously put in. So there are multiple gating mechanisms that allow so that if you, come in one gate, you have to close that gate before you can open the other gate, and they're automated, so it won't even let you open the other gate until the back gate is closed. So there's a lot that we can do to make sure that we're taking safety into account. When it comes to the height of the fencing, we would like to go to at least that 5 feet for safety purposes. And then, as Michael mentioned, we totally understand the need to put, some greenery along the fencing line just to make sure that we're, not having a big ugly fence in everybody's way. Also, another thing that we thought about with the fencing too, so there's just, all the dog guidelines. So when you have your fence posts, typically they're 4 feet apart. 4 inches apart. These would be 3 inches apart. So it just helps with any small dogs trying to slip through the cracks. So, as everybody has mentioned, there are a lot of these that are around the country, and we would take all those best practices into consideration. But any other specific questions about operation and any of that stuff, happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg and Wendy. I am a dog owner, if you can't tell by all of my questions.
We love it.
And I admire your ratio, Wendy. I have 2 kids to my 1 dog, not the reverse. And I'm a large dog owner. So so just to be clear with what you were saying, Wendy, everybody has to come in and out of that circled area. So if I'm in the large dog area and I want to go to Norcross Street, I can't get out. I have to come back through.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no gates anywhere else except...
Correct, and that will be done for safety reasons and also because it is a membership program, so we will need some monitoring of, I'm who I say I am and I'm scanning in and out. We're gonna have an app, so a lot of this will be digital that you can scan in and out of the park, but if you say that you have you're 1 dog and you're coming in with 5 dogs, somebody's going to stop you and not allow you to do that. So we want to have one way of going in and out so that we can kind of monitor who's coming in and out of the park.
And I think it's important too. I think it's also important too to remember there's a couple of different uses here. So, you know, I know we're here for the special use permit to actually deal with the dog park piece of it. But as a, you know, as a patron, if you wanted to come and just eat at the restaurant without a dog, that's completely fine. I mean, there's no membership to come in and, you know, grab a bite to eat, sit down at the bar, have a drink before you go have dinner somewhere. The patio that's outside will be dog friendly with dogs on leashes. But if you don't have a dog and you want to sit on the patio and get a quick bite for lunch, that's great, or have a drink with us before you go and have dinner, that's great as well. So the dog park membership, we feel like we have done a very good job with the renderings. And like I said, we've been at this for a while and have gone through a number of iterations to get to where we are now, that we really feel like you can see and feel the energy. If you're going to go sit out on the patio or if you're going to sit inside, you'll have a view to the park so that you can kind of feel and see that energy. But if you don't necessarily want to have a membership or you don't have a dog, we still would like for you to be available to come, and we would welcome that. So there's a couple of different uses that you can have, not necessarily on the membership side. We kind of look at it as we've kind of equated ourselves to Topgolf, and the fact that, you know, you may not necessarily, you know, like to golf or, may not be good at it, but you're going to go to Topgolf and it's an experience. You're going for the experience, you're not necessarily going because you love to play golf. So there may be people who want to create that experience or want to come and meet their friends who have a dog, and they may not have one, but they want to come and spend the Saturday afternoon with us at the park. So that you wouldn't be charged anything. It's simply for the dogs that you're paying for that membership, not necessarily for the engagement of the fun and the atmosphere that we're anticipating creating.
So is the restaurant dog friendly or not? So you're not allowed, or you can bring your dogs in?
So on the patio, you can have a dog on a leash.
Okay.
Inside, there will be very limited seating inside of the actual restaurant, but inside the restaurant, you would not be able to have a dog. So that would be reserved for if somebody, you know, we're going to do some like really cool fun. We're going to have an interesting, like, you know, on a Saturday morning, we might have local donut shop come and set up and do donuts inside. So we're going to use the inside for more special activations, not really for very much restaurant seating, because you wouldn't be able to, you can't eat in the same area with a dog off a leash. You wouldn't be able to like get your food and bring it into the dog park because it's not safe to have food and dogs running free together like that. So, but yes, you can have your dog on a leash in the restaurant on the patio.
On the patio.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about the fencing? Is that just like a 5-foot wood fence? Is that what you're looking at?
No, so it will be a steel fence, most likely. We're still working with our contractor to figure out exactly the material, but it definitely would not be a wood fence because a dog could like chew a wood fence potentially.
And they're also not as
Sturdy
attractive.
and
Yeah,
attractive.
we really want something that looks nice and kind of fits with the landscape.
I'm sure the DRB will have a lot of
Lots to say,
guidelines
which is great.
about that,
Yeah,
which
will
is
be
good.
great.
So we'll
That
take
will be
that
helpful.
feedback for sure.
All right. So I have a question. My question is, if I understand, my buddy's got a dog. He wants to let his dog hang out and have a play date with some other member's dog, and says, "Come on down and have some lunch with me."
Yeah.
So great. I'd like to come. Maybe I'd even like to bring my dog. So is it like a day pass for a dog that's a non-member?
You can, yeah. So
Okay.
you can have a day pass.
All right. And then you have a monthly, you have a...
Yearly,
Or a yearly?
yes.
Okay. And is that per dog or...
Yes. It's per dog, but it's not like, you know, we are still in the process of setting our pricing, but let's just say the monthly membership was $60. If you have 2 dogs, we're not going to charge you $120. It would be, you know, $80 for 2 dogs.
Gotcha.
Discount on your second.
Discount on
third
the
and fourth dog if you're me.
additional children.
I'm going to advocate for that, seeing as how I have 4 of them. So.
All right.
Yes, that's exactly right. And if you didn't have a dog and you just wanted to come meet your buddies, you can just come in to the park. You don't have to pay or anything. And we're hoping that while you're visiting with us, you'll have something to eat or something to drink, and you'll have a great time.
So you're saying the the natural areas for the dogs, is that natural grass? Is that turf? Is
It'll be
that,
turf.
it will be
It'll be
turf?
turf, yes.
And they can, I hate to say the word here, but, you know,
Ask us. We've been asked everything.
I know, so
Like,
how
you
does
can ask
that
us
work?
anything.
Okay, so explain to me how that works. I mean,
Yes,
is there going to be
absolutely.
somebody there picking up after the dogs?
Great question. It's a great question. Not a crazy question at all. Trust me, Wendy and I have been asked the weirdest questions you can imagine about this project, so we're happy to share. Yes, so we haven't quite named them yet, but potentially calling them referees, like referees, we're not sure yet. But there will be people who are monitoring the park. So obviously you have to be there with your dog, and we will encourage for the owners to pick up after their dogs, but we know that that's not always going to happen. So we will have people that are actually hired in the park to make sure dogs are playing nicely with each other, to pick up anything that owners aren't picking up, and making sure that the park stays clean. Also, the way that the turfing systems work, so they have, natural drainage underneath them, and they will get hosed down multiple times a day to make sure that the turf is staying very clean. It's very similar to what a lot of the doggy daycares do with their outside turfing areas, but yes, there will be a lot of sanitizing of the turf.
Okay, and then one other question on the safety, because I am concerned. One of my biggest concerns here is the fact that, it is on a very highly trafficked corner of Alpharetta, and obviously safety of our residents and the dogs crossing is important. So I am concerned about that, so, help me feel better about it.
I mean, I am completely understand. I think it's a tough thing to, for us to necessarily be able to put some type of, good feelers around this to help you feel better. Because I don't necessarily know how that's going to work, other than I know that it's happening in a lot of different places right now. Like I said, I drive past one of the dog parks that's in Atlanta that's on one of the busiest roads. I drive past it every morning to go to work and back. And they have managed it very well. And it seems as though people around here are walking their dogs anyways. They're on leashes, they're walking them, and this would give them a place where maybe they wouldn't have to do a 3-mile walk around here. They're able to kind of bring them to the dog park and let them run out their energy, put them back on a leash, and walk them back either home or to their car. We moved the parking over to the side and eliminated that curb cut specifically for safety. So we're thinking, and then we positioned how you get in and out of the park before your dog ever comes off of a leash. It will be inside of the park, far away from any kind of traffic or parking lot, quite honestly. So I think that we've done everything that we know how to do to ensure, the safety of the dogs. And part of that then comes back to the owner too. If you're comfortable and you're used to walking your dogs, you know how to be safe with them. You know what you need to do to ensure that you're not going to just take them off the leash before you get to the gate. You're going to make sure you're inside of the gate, and that's going to be our rules as well. And like Mike said, we will have people there that their concern is to ensure that everybody gets in and out of the park the way that they're supposed to, from a safety perspective. So
I can speak a little bit, I'm sorry,
No, go for
to
it.
that.
Come on.
I used to work for the city of Atlanta, and Fetch, they wanted to put a park at Decatur and Boulevard, and if you know that intersection, it's very busy. And that was a legitimate concern of the Planning Commission, used to represent them, that very question. And over the years, it's shown that it has not turned into any dogs escaping or any safety concerns there. That is a legitimate question that other jurisdictions have asked. That park has been open for many years. It's got similar fencing, and it just has not borne out with that. So I can just tell you my own personal experience in a similar jurisdiction at a similar busy intersection.
So the photograph that you just put up on the overhead, is that representative? What is that showing us?
The top photo is actually a Facebook post from Alpharetta City Center. Mm-hmm. What it says is, You might not be able to see it. It says, "Bring your furry friend to ACC for a day on the town green. We love seeing pups enjoy our dog-friendly patios and stores," and it lists various restaurants in the city center. So we brought this picture to show that this is a use that your citizens in this area
Oh,
are-
absolutely.
They love it.
You
Love
don't
it,
have to
right?
sell me on that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're in downtown Alpharetta any weekend, you see the amount of foot traffic with pets. It's just, it's a magnet, which is fabulous, but they're all on leashes.
Right.
And I think what you're hearing from some of us up here is, and I would support your research in that the townhome and condo community, you typically give up a yard where you can let your pet off leash when you're living, and that's what I'm living in right now. So I would love the ability to walk to a place where I could let him off leash. But it also is almost counterintuitive that we're putting it on one of the busiest intersections of our city, not to mention that it's the entrance to our downtown. So I love the concept. I think that there's a tremendous need for it. And I think your plan is really well researched. So I'm struggling with the fact that this is you're off leash in one of the busiest intersections. And I'm really happy to learn there's only one in and one out.
Yeah.
That helps me deal about, because, dogs are only as good as their owners are in training. So there's obviously could be issues with dogs not behaving. But the small dog park is the one that's closest to Old Milton for the smaller dogs, correct?
Yeah, so that's really more of a flex space. Like, we have it in there as a small dog area, not knowing that it may not necessarily always, that's going to be some type of removable fence that we can, pull back if we need the whole area to be open to all the dogs. Not all the time do you have to have this is all of our research, the dog parks that are here, the ones that are across the country. There are definitely days where you want to separate, and then there are days where, you may not have as many of the smaller dogs, and you don't necessarily have to create that separate area. We also want to have special events. We want people to be able to come in and do their dog's first birthday party, and, believe it or not, they have dog weddings and all those things that go along with it. Having a space to do that, if we have a area that we can kind of parcel off for that, we can have a special event in that area and still keep the park open for our patrons. So it's a little bit more of a flex space than it is anything else. Yeah,
But we never want it to feel dead or empty. So if we don't have a lot of small dogs one particular morning, we can open up the space. So we'd be able to utilize it.
I see. I didn't understand that was
Yeah.
a sort of a flex plate
Yeah.
space. Okay. I think I'm done with my questions, Chairman.
All right. Are you done with your presentation? Or?
Yes.
I believe so.
That is it.
All right, thank you. I'm going to open up the meeting for public comment, and after that, you can come and speak some more.
Thank you.
Anyone in favor of this application, please come forward. Seeing none. Anyone in opposition? None in favor, none in opposition. Do you have anything else to add before I turn this over to the board?
Just with regard to the conditions, we're here to answer any specific questions that you might have about the tweaks that we've proposed, but they speak for themselves.
Anyone has any questions? Sure.
I'm sorry, I do have a question on the conditions. Would you mind approaching? Thank you. So the restaurant, it's a restaurant and a conditional use for the recreation area. The restaurant is not a drive-through, correct? It is a sit-down. So you would be comfortable with us just adding language to condition 5 that indicates that a drive-through is not permitted?
Yes.
I think that'd be condition 1. Is that the right number?
I'll ask staff where it belongs.
Whichever it goes.
Yep, we'll ask staff.
Sure.
You're good with that? Okay. And then the height of the fence is 5 feet?
We would, yes, we would even go 6 feet. We would go as high as 6. We could go as high as 6 feet. But if there's opposition to that, I think 5 feet would be sufficient.
Michael, would you mind addressing I think you said the staff recommendation would be a max 5?
On the fence? Yeah, 5 feet would be, what I would suggest is in condition number 9. The second sentence, fencing visible from the public right-of-way shall be decorative black metal fencing. After the word fencing, I would add in no more than 5 feet in height, and then with final approval by DRB.
And then it sounds like the other markup to the original staff conditions was in regards to the condition number 6 with the percentage of brick. And your opinion is that we need to keep the 75%?
Our preference would be that we just keep it as staff is proposing currently, not accept the applicant's change this evening. That would give the applicant some time to try to address some of the downtown consultant comments. And at that time, if we feel that it would be appropriate, given the style, to remove the brick portion of the condition, then we could potentially agree to it. But without that information this evening, we would ask to leave it as staff proposes.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, I'll turn this over to the board for a motion and our discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve CU-22-05 off-leash/142 South Main Street, subject to the following conditions, with the substitution of the applicant's entry on number 1, and on number 9, that the wording shall read, required landscape strip material shall be planted in front of any proposed fencing. Fencing visible from the right-of-way shall be decorative black metal fencing no more than 5 feet in height, with final approval by DRB, and accepting the applicant's change on item number 8. And that would conclude any other changes.
I'll second that with an offer of friendly amendment to add to condition number 5, add a sentence after the site plan dated 6/14/2022, a drive-through restaurant shall be prohibited.
That's a second on that.
You agree with the friendly amendment?
Yes.
Okay. All right. A motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Motion carries. It's going to go before council on August 1st. Thank you. The second item on the agenda is PH-22-08/UDC text amendments, residential infill overlay. Kathy?
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. Let me get this in focus. The next item before you, the area is shown to you on the screen. And this, the area on the screen, it's showing you the Stonegate Manor subdivision, also Milton Estates that's shown here in yellow, and then the pink is Meadow Brook Hills. City staff was contacted in early 2022 by residents of these neighborhoods, and they had some concerns about the impacts from the redevelopment of homes in their neighborhoods. A lot of their concern had to do with the tree canopy loss, a lot of questions and concerns with stormwater impacts, as well as how height was measured. Some of the concerns that we had heard is that by our current definitions, you could actually build up the fill in the front of the yard and then put the new home and measure from the new fill that you created. So a lot of our research, and when we were looking through our code, the code was originally written with new construction in mind. So we haven't worked a lot with coming up with overlays that do look at how do you make it compatible with existing residential structures. And everything that we're going to be talking about in the overlay that we put together is ways not to prevent new development, but when new development does come into an existing neighborhood, how it becomes more compatible with the existing homes that are there. So what we did, we actually had with our comprehensive land use plan last year, we had some residents that came out at that time and said that we need to start looking at this. There's a lot of redevelopment that's happening close to downtown, as well as some of the other older neighborhoods, established neighborhoods in Alpharetta. So we had a meeting on January 26th. I believe we had over 60 people that attended that meeting. And then we also had a follow-up meeting on February 8th where we listened to some of the concerns. We put some of the recommendations together, and we had some different topics that we came back to the public on May 17th. And then we allowed a comment period of a couple weeks. During that time, we had over 30 comments that we received, and we further changed what the recommendations that you'll see tonight. So this is based on several meetings as well as comment periods. And I'll go ahead and start going through our recommendation, and I'll just use what was in your packet. The first one is actually a definition that would change our definition of how we measure height throughout the city. So this would pertain, this is a UDC change. We believe this is something that could be used for new development as well as development that could be Jane Ellen Way or other areas that you are seeing redevelopment. So what we're looking at changing is the existing, which stated that the vertical distance to the highest point of the roof surface of a flat roof, the deck line of a mansard roof, and the mean height level between eaves and ridge of a gable, hip or gambrel roof, as measured from the average finished grade across the building frontage. So currently, you can create the grade and then measure the home. So the recommended change for the building height states that you have to look at, I'll just read this, the vertical distance between the ground and the level of the highest point, same measurement from the roof, but the area that you look at to determine where you begin measuring, for the purpose of measuring building height, the ground level is the highest of the following three levels: curb level, established or mean street grade if no curb exists, or the average existing ground level adjoining the building if the building is set back more than 10 feet from the street line. And the important part of this is it says the average existing ground level. So that's different from what we previously had, which you could create where you begin to measure. So this is something that we believe is important as we're seeing redevelopment in the city and where people are buying, moving houses and building new houses. So roads exist. So we're recommending this change throughout, not just within those three neighborhoods. So after listening to specific concerns for those three neighborhoods, we have an overlay we're recommending, and I'll walk you through some of the requirements. Now, the first part is just the purpose. That's no real regulations for when people came in. That's the purpose. And where does it apply? The overlay applies to all development that includes one or more of the following: any development or vacant or unused lots, redevelopment of more than 1/3 of the existing or pre-existing building footprint, and 3, an addition or accessory dwelling exceeding the lesser of 600 square feet or 20% of existing building footprint. So if you have a 4,000 square foot house, it may be only 15%, and then you're at that 600 square foot number. So these are the where it applies. And then it goes into lots and building standards. Design standards for new development as defined. And let me talk a little bit about this. So we had asked some of the residents and builders when we had these meetings, should we look at pinpointing what architectural styles should be required in the neighborhoods. We had mixed comments. So we had a few people that said, yes, we should look at conditioning the architecture, but we did not have a consensus, not even close to a consensus. But we did have several people that stated that we don't want the same house being built side by side. And even when I had met with the builders, I said, would you do that in a new neighborhood that you're building? And they said, of course not. So that's where we focused, because we didn't have a consensus where the neighbors had said we should, the existing residents had said that we should pinpoint architectural styles. What we did find, something that we're recommending that has worked throughout the downtown, is the requirement that's number one, where a garage faces a street, the garage must be recessed a minimum distance of 20 feet behind the front building facade. We originally had a set maximum length size of a home if you're building a new home. We took that out. We actually had a few of the existing property owners, neighbors that said, well, I have a double lot. So now you're conditioning to something that I could have had twice the size of a home. So looking at some of the design of a new home, if you think about it, if you have a 2-story garage, 4-story garage, that could really change the look of the front of the house if it was all in line. So this is something that has worked throughout the downtown overlay, and that's what we recommended, that if they're with the garage, it's set back 20 feet. Number 2, that addresses the architectural variety. Proposed residences within an established neighborhood must incorporate architectural variety to their front facade, ensuring house style and diversity. Duplicative front facade elevations adjacent to each other are prohibited. Simple reverse configuration of the same facade elevation on adjacent lots are not sufficient to meet this requirement. And then we further detail how you ensure that elevation is different. We also, when we had our initial meeting in February, many, if not most, of the comments were regarding stormwater. Some of the residents had told us that some of the structures that were in ground they didn't believe that those were functioning. We went and looked at all of those structures. We did not find, and it wasn't an in-depth study, but we didn't find that anything that wasn't functioning. But what we decided to do immediately because of those concerns is we actually changed our stormwater regulations back in March. And back in March, we changed our regulations because the code is a little bit different with regulations for stormwater. You're permitted by our manual that if you see something that needs to be changed and addressed because there's a drainage issue, you can immediately make those changes without going through an ordinance change. Even though we changed those back in March, we're including that in the overlay so it's very clear to everyone. Number 1, soils infiltration testing is required prior to issuing any development permit required to install an infiltration practice for all development that adds between 1,000 and 4,999 square feet of new impervious area. The soils testing will include the following 3 items: infiltration rates, depth to water tables, depth to bedrock. So prior to this change in March, you were not required to do the soil testing. So that was the big change with adding number 1. Number 2, we also begin requiring that certification that the green infrastructure measure was installed as designed at the end of construction is required, as well as a maintenance covenant be recorded with the Property Records Office for all future homeowners. So not only do you have to do the soil test, install it correctly, but you have to have a design engineer say that it was installed correctly, and it has to be recorded so that the homeowner knows about the maintenance. And then 3, development that adds or replaces 5,000 square feet or more of impervious area shall complete a full stormwater management study, B, soil testing, C, measure certification, and D, recording of a maintenance covenant. And I did have an email question from somebody today that won't be able to attend, and they stated, well, what if the house comes in and it's 4,990 then, 6 months later, they get a pull permit. Well, if it goes over the 5,000 within a certain timeline, which is 2 years, you do have to go through that full hydrology study. So that's not a way to kind of get around doing the full hydrology study. And then C, land disturbance. We also had a lot of comments from the residents that the contractors and subs were blocking the roadway. Well, current code for the city for erosion control requires that you put silt fence at the edge of curb, and you really aren't permitted to be able to set that silt fence back from the curb. So we're proposing within these overlay areas that silt fencing shall be permitted to be set back from the existing roadway by up to 20 feet from the edge of pavement for the purpose of creating a gravel area to assist with sub-parking as well as material drop-off. This area shall be maintained to avoid tracking into the roadways. Setting that back 20 feet just allows additional places for the subs to park. And then we have the tree preservation.
Before you go to that, can we ask you a question as you go along
that's fine.
instead of wait until we finish?
Absolutely.
The stormwater design requirements, we have between 1,000 square feet and 4,999. And then 3 is if the development adds or replaces 5,000 square feet. I would propose changing the item 1 to 1,000 square feet, but not less than 5,000 square feet.
Okay.
There is a foot in between that's not regulated.
That's a good point. Yes, we can make that change.
All right. That was it.
Yes, because if somebody comes in at 4,999.5, you're exactly right. So we'll make that change.
Okay.
Should I continue with the
Yes.
tree? Okay. So with tree preservation, number one, it says minimum tree density is what we have in the code already. So we already have that within the code. So we're saying keep that, but we have some additional incentives to save trees that are above and beyond what our code allows, and I'll go through what that is. So if you look at number 2, rear landscape strip, within the overlay district boundaries, all for sale residential lots shall include a 10-foot undisturbed or replanted landscape strip along the rear property line. If property includes stream buffers, floodplain, or other zoning buffers, this rear buffer location and width may be shifted, removed, or altered as approved by the city arborist to accommodate alternative layouts. And when we went through our meeting back in May, the difference here is we had the 10-foot was on the sides of the house. And after looking at some of the site plans, existing homes and some of the places where there were some existing drainage issues, we determined that the rear was the more appropriate and area to require the landscape strip instead of the sides. Number 3, additional tree credits. Again, residents said, how do you save more trees within the development? So we looked at our existing tree allowances, and we increased the density credits if you're within these neighborhoods in order to encourage, incentivize for existing tree saves. So for instance, A, specimen trees may receive a density credit of 3 times the inches as long as the encroachment into the critical root zone is below 20%. So outside of these 3 neighborhoods, you would only receive 2 times the credit. So this is an effort to incentivize saving the existing tree canopy. We also give credit for trees of quality, and tree groupings may reduce recompense plantings. The reduction shall be calculated considering 2 times the inches of trees of quality or tree groupings. What this means is if it's not a specimen tree, but it's still a good tree that should be saved, we're going to give you 2 times the inches for the trees of quality. Outside of this area, it would be 1 time. So this doubles in these 3 neighborhoods and incentivizes the saving. And again, it has to be as long as the critical root zone and the encroachment is below 20%. And then we also have tree replanting. So in addition to having to meet the tree density per each lot. We also have put in here requirements because of the drainage problems and the impacts that we've seen. Trees that actually that absorb stormwater. So if you look at A, it is desirable to plant at least 20% medium or large evergreens as specified in the tree list in the guidance document to enhance the interception of rainfall year-round. B, trees selected for minimum tree density planting shall be water-loving species, and then we list those: the weeping willow, red maple, black gum, cypress. And these are for the minimum tree density. So, of course, you could have trees in addition to the minimum tree density. D, spacing and number of trees shall be calculated based upon the average canopy spread of the species selected as outlined in the arborist guidance document in relation to the linear length of property road frontage. And E, when tree spacing exceeds 30 feet on center, at least one ornamental tree shall be incorporated into the design and planted in the front yard. So if there's an existing utility box and you have to exceed the 30 feet, it's going to be a requirement to put an understory like a dogwood or some type of tree. And then F, in order to maintain street character, shade trees selected for the streetscape shall be overstory canopy trees of the oak, maple, and elm, and sycamore, or as approved by the city arborist. And I'll tell you why we put that requirement in there. And you know, these are all beautiful houses that have been built out there and existing homes, but we noticed that there wasn't consistency with street trees along the road. So even if we incentivize saving the trees, we require the 10-foot landscape strip at the back, we also want to create that canopy for the future along the street. And some of them do have the street trees, and then some of them were able to save an existing tree. So that would be, of course, if you're saving an existing tree, there wouldn't be additional trees needed. But that was in order to make sure we create that canopy along the street and put the street trees every 30 feet on center. I think I have. Just trying to get the street trees and have that streetscape is the meaning of the last requirement. And that is the overlay presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those.
Thank you so much for your presentation, very comprehensive. How much of this area is undeveloped?
I think it's about 50% in the Meadow Brook area. I didn't count in the Stonegate Manor. I don't think that they're at the 50%, but this is probably right at about 50%. And there's some homes with minor additions that have been added, and people want to stay in the existing smaller home and just have maybe made a small addition, and then you'll see a two-story home or larger. And
what are the sizes of the parcels approximately?
Some of them are large, probably over an acre, because of the creek that's located. So they range anywhere probably from 12,000 square feet up to an acre. So different sizes throughout the neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Kathy?
I had a quick question, Kathy, or maybe a clarification on something you said. When you said most of the comments that you got back were in regards to the stormwater, and I guess when the city went out, you said everything was working fine, but I think a lot of the residents might disagree with that assessment, so kind of help me and help us understand what you meant by that.
Absolutely. So there's been two different sets of meetings. So there's some existing stormwater issues that the Public Works has been having meetings regarding, and I believe the plan that was presented June 21st to the neighborhood is to install curb and gutter, and they're also looking at putting some tanks underground. What we focused on is requirements for new development. So some of the comments, and I'll clarify that we had heard back in February, were that some of the underground tanks that were put in as private underground detention on some of the new construction lots weren't functioning properly. And what they meant by that is some of them that were supposed to be draining were holding water. So that was something that we went out and looked at. And what we found at that time is that they weren't finalized, so they were still under construction. But what it brought to the table of listening to those concerns is that we needed to make sure that we got the engineer to sign off that it was installed and functioning properly, as well as anybody buying that property knows that they were going to have the long-term maintenance. So there was a lot of concerns brought to us that were great to be able to look at what this overlay should include.
Now, is this specific to, I know I'm reading this, but I just want to clarify, specific to the Meadow, Brook Hills, the Milton Estates, and Stonebrook Manor, or all of Alpharetta? Just these three neighborhoods or all of Alpharetta?
Just these three neighborhoods for the overlay that I went through, but the height would be changed within how we determine height. The height definition would be within the Unified Development Code, which would be all of Alpharetta.
I'd actually like to ask a question about the same. So so as I'm looking at this map, it would be reasonably easy to see the next areas that would have the potential to become shaded. So my question is, many of the criteria that would be applicable to this overlay district would seemingly also make sense for a lot of other places. So is there a reason to limit it now?
These are the neighbors that we've had the meetings with,
Okay.
And that brought the concerns to us. We are planning on putting together, and that'll probably with it be in the next 60 days, criteria if you want the city to look at establishing an overlay, what that criteria would involve. If you look at what we could require right now, if you want, say, speed humps in a neighborhood, we require that you have a certain percentage of neighbors that would put together that request and the reasons for that request. So we're going to look at what other cities have done that have experienced a lot of more redevelopment and come through with some criteria, which then the neighbors can work together, bring some of their concerns forward. The neighbors that we spoke with these three neighborhoods, they didn't have that. We didn't have that process. So we had, the public meetings in order to make sure that we heard. But that is something, great question. We'll come forward with some criteria.
Okay. And just, okay, and I will apologize, and I know we have a lot of guests here this evening, so I'll have a little bit of personal disclosure. My wife will often accuse me of being the Lorax. And always wondering where have all the trees gone. So is there a reason, and I am asking because I don't know, and I apologize, and I hope the rest of the commissioners indulge me with this. If you take down a big guy, is there no way to say, you got to put a big guy back? It may not be here initially, but it may be here 10 years from now. So apparently I struck a nerve with that comment. Yeah. So I just don't understand how that portion of it doesn't quite work. And I know it would take time.
And we still have that in here. I mean,
Okay.
so we already have that requirement that it has, if you're taking down a big tree, it has to be it has to be double. So a 2-inch caliper is what you're required to do just to meet the overlay. So if you take out a large tree, it's 4 inches. So big difference when you're going up, doubling the tree, the size of the tree from 2 to the 4. But there's also arborists, they don't want, trees do not survive if you plant them too large in the beginning. So that's a lot of what arborists in general, not just the city arborist, but studies have shown.
And I guess
the survivability.
And I should probably be more clear. I'm not saying big today,
Right.
but perhaps
Yes.
big tomorrow.
Yes,
Yeah.
and That's something we also have, that you have to have 30% canopy coverage, because if you look at the arborist guidance document, you pick trees and look at the future canopy, and you have to have a minimum coverage of 30% of that lot. And that's another thing with the overlay that we're proposing. It requires those additional canopy-type trees, the elms, the maples, large canopy trees that would be planted along the street.
Okay, thank you.
Regarding the lot and building standards, item A says design standards for new development as defined on the previous page. Does that mean, this is for clarification purposes, only applies to item 1, any development on vacant unused lot, or it also includes redevelopment in addition of to existing structures? Is that the intent, to cover all 3 items on the previous?
It is, and that's probably not worded very well, so we'll put as defined above.
And you don't believe there are potential and intended consequences for burdening very small lots of 12,000 square feet, similar to 1 acre lots in terms of stormwater regulations, for example?
For the soil tests, we
Yes.
don't. From some of the concerns that we've seen, and in the area, I think it's important that we still require those soil tests.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question about the applicability for redevelopment of more than a third? I guess it's number 2 relative to that. Is there something about that? And I guess my question is it the intention to encourage some fairly careful consideration of what's going back in if something's being removed? And if that's the case, would it be more helpful to ensure that new structure fits better, perhaps in an existing neighborhood, I guess, if that was a quarter as opposed to a third? Or would that start to scoop up more properties than were intended?
And most of the time, redevelopment is different from number 3. So number 3, it's the addition or accessory dwelling.
I gotcha. Okay.
So 2 is the redevelopment.
I gotcha.
So,
Okay. I gotcha. I didn't read those that way.
yeah.
Another question I have on the architecture, Kathy. So explain to me, like you said that you didn't want side by side them to be the same.
Correct.
So are you suggesting then that you wouldn't have 2 big white farmhouses side by side, or what does that actually mean?
Well, it could be 2 of the same style, but if you look at it can't be the exact same home. So when we have a home that comes in, we're going to look at where the porch is located, the number of windows across the front, and we're going to make sure that it isn't something that's just flipped but still the same. And the way that we're going to look at that is listed in A, B, C, D, and E. Different window openings. So we will make sure that it's not the same house. We have our zoning administrator, when somebody comes in for a building permit, that sees what they're requiring, and then now we'll have the extra requirement that they show the photograph of existing homes on each side.
I think on second reading of the question I just asked, I think it's clear because you do define that new development includes all 3 items. I don't think there needs to be any change. Any other questions for Kathy?
I have one more. When I was reading through all the letters from many of our residents, one of them came from a tree removal service, and I felt really bad for him as he talked about how he felt like he was being considered a tree killer instead of a tree remover.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, is there a way for a company to come out there who's legitimately removing trees because, you know, they've passed the permitting process,
Right.
they've gotten approval, and so how does a resident know who's living around this area and the trees being removed that he's doing what he's supposed to be doing instead of,
Yeah.
you know, being considered a tree killer?
Right. And they will call, and we will have people call to see if somebody has a permit. But we also have a list of verified tree removal companies. And so the process, they've gone through training, they've gone through different processes. So they don't have as many steps to go through with the permit process. I mean, you still have to show and prove that you meet the density on a lot, as well as if it's a large tree that's being removed, have to have an arborist report. So we do make them go through all of those different requirements before they get a permit. And that's something that we looked at all of the different houses that were under construction, and you have to look at every single lot. You have to look at every situation. When somebody's bringing in a house, there's a requirement within our code that says if you can provide an alternate plan to save trees, we have to force an alternate plan. So they have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they cannot save that tree prior to getting that permit, or that they meet the tree density within the lot. So I don't think I answered your question, but I don't know how to kind of have the stamp of approval so people know that they have a tree removal permit. Because if you received a permit to build a new home, you would actually have the permit box out front, but you don't have to have that just to remove a tree. So that's something, I mean, we'll think about ways.
Thank you. Going to ask for public comments. Anyone would like to speak in favor, please come forward. We have a nice crowd tonight. We like it when people show up.
Mr. Chairman, I have one comment card. First one's Michael Buchanan, 135 Pebble Trail, shows undecided.
Okay. Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Hello there. Michael Buchanan, 135 Pebble Trail, Alpharetta, and I'm glad to be speaking to you tonight. I speak for many of my neighbors, and this letter is kind of based upon input from them, and I do appreciate the efforts by our city to address our concerns, and for you for listening. A week or so ago, I sketched out a letter for tonight. I spoke about why most of us moved here and how we enjoyed Alpharetta life. And I wrote about the recent changes and new direction to our city, and of course our efforts to save trees and other concerns. Other cities have done it. Why couldn't ours, I wondered. But the more I wrote, the more I felt my words were for naught. I had this growing awareness that my voice and that of others here was listened to, but perhaps not really heard. And when I hear from more than one Alpharetta citizen that they really don't like the new Alpharetta and can't wait to leave, I became convinced that something is amiss. It would be easy to let these challenges overwhelm me and move on as well, but that is just not my nature. And as evidenced by the crowd here, it's not their nature as well. Therefore, we are here to ask, how would a new overlay have changed the clear-cut lots we see in town? Why are some purchased houses in their yards allowed to fall into disrepair? Why wasn't Hook Street and other neighborhoods included in the overlay and Garden District designation? Where is the Garden District conversation? Why does the city have only one arborist to deal with a multitude of tasks? And why the city had little or no pushback on the mess of Highway 9? And why it feels like water runoff has only recently been considered, and among other things, why the Alpharetta we loved became a vintage postcard, cast aside because of one thing our city evidently possesses in abundance: opportunity. I emphasize that those of us here are not against progress. We love the walkability of our city, the Arts Center, the emphasis on the arts, among so many other things. We welcome responsible progress and innovative, not repetitive, architecture. And I want to say that I find no or little fault in the developers. They do what they are enabled to do. I find it very interesting in talking with some of these developers that they are equally confused with the process of our progress. And there is a definite distinction between developers who are merely passing through and those who will reside in Alpharetta. So here we are, living in a town that cuts 150-year-old oaks because they might be dead in 15 years, while we read an overlay concerned with how we move forward, while concurrently lessening citizen concerns. But an overlay, while it should be fairly concrete, doesn't appreciate the sun rising through an elderly pin oak. An overlay doesn't walk around the block to witness the vibrant colors of fall. An overlay doesn't have to see a river in its front yard every time it rains. And an overlay doesn't know that once things change, there is no going back. But we, the voters, know. I taught school for many years, and I told my students that a butterfly or a rainbow will never put another nickel in your pocket, but aren't we glad they exist? To me, it feels like a little more examination of why so many people are here tonight might be an appropriate thing. The accelerated changes in Alpharetta were not inevitable. They didn't have to happen as they did, but we knew that changes were taking place. Many cities I visit, like Fernandina and Annapolis, have a different, more studied approach. There's much more that I could mention, but I will end with this. I trust that those who work very hard for Alpharetta are not only listening to, but also hearing what the people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else?
Commissioners, good evening. My name is Kenneth Kaplan. I am a resident of 150 Pebble Trail. A bunch of our neighbors got together and we informally formed an organization we're calling the Alpharetta Conservancy because we're really concerned about what's happening in our community. The reason I'm standing here before you is I really want to bring to your attention what we're seeing in our community, particularly the Stonegate community. My wife and I moved into the community partially because the City Council rightfully designated part of Alpharetta the Garden District. The Garden District meaning we have trees. In our little neighborhood, my wife and I moved into, I think 3 years ago. During COVID, since COVID, I think 15 homes in our neighborhood have either been purchased and torn down or are in the process of being purchased and torn down, and it will probably go up significantly. On May 31st, I wrote a letter to staff. Kathy, has that letter been transmitted to the commission?
Yes, we have it.
It has, okay. Attached to my letter were some pictures from our neighborhood. And the thing that's bothering us and concerns us the most is what appears to be absolute clear-cutting of properties. All right? I assume this thing works. If not, I'll pass this up. This is an example of a lot in our neighborhood. And there are many of them like that. Every single tree, with the exception of some in the rear, have been ripped out of those lots. It's happening over and over again. As you probably know, a nice little tree down the block was cut down, probably a 200-year-old tree, if not more. We made several recommendations to staff to address this, and I think Kathy at the last meeting mentioned that they were going to consider them. They considered none, not one of the things we asked them to consider, and they didn't have the courtesy of even responding to us. One of the things we asked is that the criteria for trees that must remain on the property be reconsidered. 130 inches. 130 inches is what they're requiring remain on a property. That's 4 trees at 35 inches. That's it. How can you consider that part of the garden district? 35 inches. The second thing we asked is that they reconsider the disincentives for developers ripping out trees. I heard that tree, a 200-plus-year-old tree, the developer had to pay an $800 fine. What kind of disincentive is $800 to somebody who's putting up a $3 million home? We respectfully ask you to consider this overlay, send it back to staff, and ask them to put some real disincentives for this clear cutting that's going on in our neighborhoods, because you can't have a garden district without trees, and that's what we're seeing in our neighborhood. And I also urge you, take a ride through Stonegate. Take a look at those lots that are being clear cut. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else who'd like to speak? Please come forward.
I'm Perry Bynum, owner of 184 Mayfield Circle, recent owner. It's in one of the subject areas. And my only real questions are, it just seems like, Mr. Perkins and Mr. Bendel brought it up, that the applicability of the overlay and the guidelines should in some short time frame have a broader scope to the other activity that's already going on, on the other streets and neighborhoods in the area. That's it. They've invested the time and the resources, even though things were initiated by the residents in this neighborhood. Kathy and the team, they've already invested the time and the resources. I would think, there'd be a way to expedite that and not require the residents of each neighborhood to trigger these things, and that the changes they're trying to make just apply to a broader scope, in essence, to all the neighborhoods in the downtown area. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? All right. I'll close public comment. Ms. Cook, do you have anything else to add before I turn it over to the board for discussion and our comments? I'd like to respond to some of the concerns from the speakers.
Yes, I just want to add that we did go through all the different comments and look at different recommendations, and these are the staff recommendations. Also, just want to add that we will be coming back quickly with overlay requirements. That's something that the board can consider to put within the code to what the process is for the overlay request.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, I did have one follow-on. Is that all right, Mr. Chairman?
I'll turn it over to the board and you can ask any questions you like. And I just did.
On the overlay then, so this obviously I've already asked, it just applies to these 3 neighborhoods, but you're working on doing a bigger overlay for the more of the Alpharetta area.
Absolutely, because you don't want to add areas without notifying people and then giving them a chance. And of course, and I'm not saying that that's what they were saying we should do, but we've only notified people within this overlay that we have these plans to put the overlay in place. And, I know some neighborhoods, even like Jane Allen Way, if you look at some of the ranches that are being converted, they're not really adding on to them, they're converting them to contemporary architecture. So when we meet with them, it may be that they do want to enact that everything's contemporary architecture. So I think it's important that you give the neighborhoods their voice and what their concerns are.
So Kathy, the 3, the areas that we're talking about, help me understand, they are part of the garden area as well?
That's correct.
Okay, the ones that are not color shaded. the blocks in between and the one below.
There's other areas that are within the garden district, and I think what he was stating is that the entire garden district should be taken in as part of that overlay, but I believe that's something where you need to notify and have those conversations
Okay.
first.
So just for clarification purposes, I am unclear if you could give us the boundary lines for where the garden district begins and ends.
Well, some have said that the garden district ends at Mayfield and Canton Street, but others have brought documentation that it's farther on Canton Street, Hopewell, and it actually goes to Vaughn Drive. Yes, so we've had some that have stated that it ends in the Mayfield Road area, and then some that have shown some documents that it goes to Vaughn Drive, which is on Hopewell, Canton Street.
So one of the speakers indicated that City Council had formally created the garden district. Is that accurate?
There wasn't anything that I'm aware of where we formally created a district, unless that was over 30 years ago before I started, but it was something that could have been created. It was always something that was talked about, the garden district, but I don't recall a formal identification, but I'll certainly research that and let the Planning Commission know at our next meeting.
Would it be a good idea? Well, that's not the proper word. Would it be prudent to actually establish the boundaries formally and have that adopted by City Council?
Yes, and I do know that we had some residents towards the downtown on Canton Street that had notified our cultural arts to try to request some signage that would identify the area as the garden district. And I don't know where they are with that, but that's something that I can find out.
I would recommend that, and that becomes a formal defined boundary, so it's clear what area is being. If we're going to come up with an overlay, we need to be certain what area is covered.
Absolutely. I'll do that research of where they are with that.
I know our purpose is to address the specifics of the overlay, but just you being so gracious in answering some of the questions. As other communities have faced similar challenges with transition, my assumption would be that as the city staff considers how to implement these things, they're looking to sort of the best practices that are used in other communities.
Absolutely.
Relative to that. Okay. And again, I'm sharing the kinds of things that I hear conversationally with people is the issue of fines where there's violations, and how do you really have some hammer behind, some of the violations. What's the, and I don't need the Schoolhouse Rock version of how that gets to be, but where does the fine associated with those sorts of violations, where does it originate? How does it come through?
That would be in our tree ordinance, so you would not put that as part of an overlay requirement. If the city wanted to look at changing the fines, that is something that we would look at the tree ordinance, because when you have fines, you can get into some trouble if the fines are different in different areas. So you have to make sure that you're putting something that can be legally upheld, because people can appeal their fine amounts. So you cannot say this area of Alpharetta is more important for a fine versus another area if you want it to stick. So that's something that we would look at as part of the tree ordinance. And the tree ordinance right now says $1,000 per occurrence, which is a small number. The number that's a big number in the tree ordinance is that recompense is 8 times the inches. So if you have a 40-inch tree that's removed that you didn't have a permit for, you have to replant or pay for 8 times that amount. Now, if it's not part of construction and you had some type of an agreement and it's just not part of a construction site, it's 3 times. So it's a very heavy-duty replant cost. But again, you wouldn't put that in an overlay, a fine. That would be something we look at with the tree ordinance as part of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I ask more questions? You had, Kathy, when you introduced the ordinance or the UDC changes and the overlay this evening, you talked through the fact that city staff was involved with numerous meetings over the last several months, January, February, I think May as well. And then there was a 30-day comment period. So I'm assuming the 30-day comment period was a draft was written by staff and then distributed to the residents in these 3 areas for their comments and feedback. What we heard tonight, was that represented in the feedback that you received during the 30-day comment period?
Yes, and it was actually 2 weeks. We actually asked for comments within 2 weeks. We did receive some comments past that 2-week period, and it's not like we just cut it off and wouldn't, but we took comments for that entire 2 weeks.
So
looked at each comment. We went through old site plans, looked at the neighborhood, took pictures of all existing homes that were previously on that lot, homes beside of that. So we spent a lot of time going through those comments and trying to come up with something that we thought was a recommendation that was still not taking away property rights. If, we had some residents that says, what if I want to build a pool? And now you're requiring, if I have a 30-inch tree in my backyard, I'm not going to be able to put a pool. So there was a lot of different comments, a lot of site plans that we went through. And since we knew we couldn't come up with fines for trees, it was more to incentivize. So the incentives here are greater. So it was something about giving, more carrots in order to save those trees.
Thank you.
All right. Motion, any further discussion?
Well, this is a comment, and maybe Kathy can, it just seems to me like, and I'll go with Jamie on his comment on if you take one tree down to add one of similar size, or, but it just seems to me like maybe we need to characterize this area better instead of, and I'm talking out loud here, but instead of penalizing the developer, we want to, we want to encourage them to create the feeling of the neighborhood in existence now. Like if I go down Shady Lane, I love that canopy feel, and you're just like, oh gosh, I love this, it's so beautiful, I want to live here. But we're not creating that experience because we're clear cutting lots and building these big homes, and so we're actually destroying the thing that we love being part of that garden community. So I'm just trying to figure out how we create that that feeling so that the developers buy in and everybody buys into this. Anyway, I'm thinking out loud.
Well, so the challenge is the recognition of the need follows the start of the trend, right? I am at times perplexed about how it seems as though there were various times in home construction where it was possible to construct a home that fit around existing trees. And I know that it's not just a frustration that's shared by them. I would imagine that in a personal capacity, all sorts of people might have different perspective about the frustrations of how some of the neighborhoods that are right now immediately adjacent to, but it really exists in other parts of the community. Every time we look at a development issue and it's going into a place where there are existing trees, we sort of work through these issues of how is it going to look different after. And I appreciate the idea that we would want to create carrots, and I think that we should continue to do that. I struggle with the idea that we don't also have sufficient sticks somewhere in the process that says you gotta rework this a little bit and try to sit this a little bit differently, and you gotta work around some of the things that are there. And so it would if Martine was here, it's probably akin to sailing. We're tacking a little this way, we're tacking a little that way, and we're trying to get to a community that both pays reference to or recognition to what makes it so appealing, but yet also allows, sadly, some of those market forces that incentivize the replacement of one home with another.
Yeah, it feels if let's just say 30 or 40% of some of these neighborhoods have been redeveloped. That's done. You can't go back on that. But going forward and looking at the language, does that the language? I know you've put this together. Put in protections for the neighbors so that these things won't be happening in the future. The clear cutting of the lots and such.
There's nothing in here that doesn't, that requires that a lot remain undisturbed. Is that? No, there's nothing in here that would require that they.
Completely undisturbed, but that some of the trees remain, or because how do you? The developer has the ability, but no incentive. The ability to cut down all the trees. But does the new language here say, wait a minute, you're not really able to do that?
No, it gives incentives to save the existing trees. It requires a 10-foot landscape strip at the rear, which is not required now. And it does say the 10-foot landscape strip at the rear can be undisturbed or replanted. Plus, it has additional requirement to plant canopy trees along the front. And some of those, too, with some of the issues that we're looking at within the neighborhoods, the main issue that we see is some of the stormwater issues. So in order to fix some of those issues, we saw different plans where you would have to clear some of the trees on the lots in order to install infiltration systems. We even looked at putting sidewalks, requiring sidewalks. We couldn't require sidewalks within these neighborhoods because it creates additional impervious surface. So there was a lot of that of what is, although there's a huge desire for more tree canopy, we couldn't find an area that we could just say this has to remain undisturbed because with the property rights that people have, and as soon as you put, a requirement that it has to remain undisturbed, you don't typically get a lot of support for putting that much government control. So I think what we did is went through a lot of what we could support, what made sense, and looked at incentivizing.
And we have to look at these recommendations specifically to what the scope is. As Ms. Cook mentioned with respect to the tree ordinance, what is being proposed by staff is an enhancement to what is already in the tree ordinance.
Correct.
And if there was a need to go back and revisit that, we'd be discussing this within that context. Because when I look at these recommendations at first glance, I thought, well, they could be interpreted as being a little bit stringent on the smaller parcels, but the law is defined as a set of rules and regulations by which society is willing to be governed. And if the community within these areas or the people within these areas willing to be governed by this, and there's been consensus, we have followed a public process, there have been comments, and you've incorporated them within reason because you also have to balance a lot of other things, this is a step forward. And we can always come back and revisit and make enhancements. The option at the moment is either to not do nothing, adopt these changes and make improvements, or wait until we look at this more comprehensively. If there are specific amendments or changes that the board would like to recommend to staff, words, that would be appropriate. But I think the comments made by the speakers were very appropriate, and the comments we received are very good. We like to see what is on people's minds, and the questions you're asking are relevant. I just want to make sure that we also think in terms of what is before us today.
Thank
But
you.
I'm not limiting debate.
No.
If you want to continue to discuss, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did read a comment that one of the residents wrote in his letter that talked about the proper balance to permit continued economic growth in Alpharetta while at the same time preserving the beauty and unique character of our neighborhood. And while this isn't perfect by any stretch, I do think it is a step in the right direction. And I know staff has worked very hard in trying to come up with something that will help preserve and also balance our economic growth. So I do think it's a good thing at the moment, and we'll continue to improve as needed.
One of the things, having been on this board for now 13 years, believe it or not, our staff is very diligent and very sensitive to maintaining the values, the character, the health, the quality of life of this city. And we do get quite often make changes to the UDC. And when they approached, I read the history about how this came about. The community approached staff, they took notice, they did some research, they have come up with recommendations. If these are not sufficient, I'm sure they're going to be willing to come back and make additional recommendations, because sometimes you make changes that cause some unintended consequences. And I trust in their ability, their diligence, their wisdom in giving us what they believe is the most reasonable and fair changes. Of course, we listen to what you have to say, and if there are changes we want to recommend to council to approve, we would do that on the floor. Having read this, other than the one recommendation I made, I don't find anything else I'd like to change at this time. But if anyone else would want to make a change, improvement, deletion, that would also be appropriate.
I would agree with your comments, and I think I would just simply add, before we maybe move to a motion to, adopt this language, that perhaps some of this boils down to what is often the interested neighbor test. As you walk by a property and you see some changes and you wonder what's the process that goes on beyond it. And I think sometimes many of us are accustomed to seeing a house occupy a certain amount of space on a property, and then a replacement structure goes in there, and it would seem as though some of the additional tree removal extends well beyond where the replacement structure is. So I would wonder, as we consider to revisit this in the future, if there is a distinction that could be drawn between those trees that would perhaps need to be removed because they are more immediately adjacent to the new structure, and those trees which are sort of innocent bystanders someplace else on the property, and whether that's a percentage of caliper inches on the property, and there's certain restrictions, maybe visiting in a different way, that both gives the property owner sufficient latitude to do what they choose to with their property, but by the same token also pumps the brakes maybe on just some removal of convenience during a construction process that may not necessarily be necessary to the long-term use and enjoyment of the property.
Any further discussion, motion? Somebody's got to make a motion.
This is I'm to make the motion? Would you like me to make the motion?
I'll make a motion.
Or continue
Okay.
to discuss.
Do you want me to make the motion? To approve PH-2-2-08 Unified Development Code Text Amendment Residential Overlay District. Do I need?
There is, I made a recommendation to make a a minor change on B, the lot and building standards, and that would be B1, development that adds between 1,000 square feet, but less than 5,000 square feet. We don't have a motion until it's seconded.
I'll make a second, Mr. Chairman.
A motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries. City Council is going to consider this on August 1st, so please come back and share your thoughts with City Council. They make the final decision. Thank you for joining.